Good afternoon. My name is Joan Doyle and I am a library assistant and artist, and I work here at the Canton branch of the Haywood County Library. Today we're going to paint in watercolors a Blue Ridge mountain scene, and so this is it. And there's just a few things you'll need: some watercolor paper, of course, some water, and a medium-sized brush. If it's got a fine point, that's all you'll need. You won't need anything smaller for fine detail. You can use the point of it, so it keeps it very simple, just one brush. The colors you'll need are red, a lemon yellow. You can use the lemon yellow and red and mix it and make orange, or if you have orange, that's great. I've used two blues. There's ultramarine blue and Prussian blue. The Prussian blue is a really dark blue for the darkest darks of the painting. And the yellows and reds and oranges are in the sky. So the things you will learn today are wet on wet painting, where you will put wet paint onto a wet surface, and it gives you all this nice softness you see in the sky. On the hills, we'll be letting each level dry as we go through, so there is some waiting time in between, which is pretty much classic with watercolors. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is to wet the sky. This is for our wet on wet painting, soft clouds and colors that we want to put in the sky. So, well, actually the first thing I did was draw out the mountains. So you'll need a pencil, and if you have, a scene, a mountain scene that you recognize from your home or whatnot, you can go ahead and use that. So the first thing I've done is just wet the whole thing just with water. And then I take some of my yellow and add a little water to it. So you need a good strong yellow color, and see, nice and bright. We're going to place, we'll imagine that the sun has gone down behind this mountain right here. So most of the yellow is concentrated in this area. And then we can take a little bit of the orange, add some water to it, make it nice and watery. And we can begin to add some orange with the yellow. See how nice and soft they blend. You won't get any hard edges when you have already put water on the paper. So what I mean by a hard edge is like, say, the ridge of the mountain. You want that. We have a hard edge here because this is dry and this is wet. And that's exactly what we want. But up here, where all the clouds are, see how the water is flowing and creating, it's doing its own thing. I'm not really creating clouds, I'm just adding color. And when it comes to clouds, they're all different. And when you paint your clouds, they're going to be different from the person next to you, just as mine are different from the painting I already did. I'm going to add in a little red here just for sunsetty colors. Don't want it too strong. A little bit up here. That's a pretty colored sky. So you can imagine that the sun is catching this cloud here. It's kept it nice and soft. I don't want it too wet. You don't want your paper so wet that the water is flowing around. You just want to see that it's a little shiny. If it's too wet, if you got too much water on there, you can always take your tissue and just dab it and it'll lift off a lot of the water. We want to keep the brightest place right here. So I'm going to take a little bit of my blue now. Blue and red make purple. So I'm going to create a little purple. I don't want it to be too dark, but you know, it's nighttime, so the top of the sky will be the darkest place. So we can imagine a couple of clouds that are up here, the sky behind the clouds. It's getting a little darker toward the top of our painting. We could even put some in down here like this. If we think this is a cloud that's catching the sun as it goes behind the mountains, we can always just add a little bit of purple on the top of it, because the sun's catching the bottom, but it's not catching the top. So there's the top of that cloud, the top of this cloud. So we've got some interesting clouds happening, and look how it just does its own thing. It's just one of the wonderful things about watercolor. It does its own thing regardless. Of course, you can have more control if you paint onto a dry surface, but for us, and this is a cloudy sky, and we'd like it to be soft and have that feeling of, well, how clouds feel. Very watery, very loose. Let's see if I'll put a little more orange in there, I think, just to make it strong color, because maybe the sun's catching the bottom of that cloud. But it's not as strong as down here where it's reds. So just have fun with it. Yours will look completely different than mine, but just, this is the idea. We're creating an idea of a sky, and it's nice and light. I'm just gonna break up this area with a little bit of purpley blue. It's looking too uniform in my eye. See how it just floats into what's already there and creates something. As long as it's wet, you'll get soft. But if it starts to get dry, you're going to get hard edges when it dries. So I think that's fun. I'm pretty happy with that, except for maybe this corner over here, because this is whiter than what I've got here, so I'm going to add a little color in there. And if I don't want that strong line right there, just take some plain old water and just put along the edge of it, and that'll soften it and let it flow back this direction. So now I've got a nice bright area right here where the sun has gone behind the mountain. And it's definitely very focused. Your eye goes straight to the brightest point. Yeah, so have fun, like I said. Now we're going to let that dry, because if I am to paint this mountain next, which is what I'm going to do, and I touched off of that, the water and the color is going to draw that color down here. And I'll show you where in this painting it wasn't completely dry and I got a little yellow here. Now I didn't mind, because it's right where the sun, I see the sun is having gone down behind the mountain. So it's possible that that mountain would be catching a bit of that color, because the sun's rays could be coming over that mountain rim right there where it is. It's right behind there. And so I left it. I just let it be. It wasn't my intention. So this time I'm going to let the background dry, and we're going to paint the mountains next. So very often if I'm waiting too long, I'll get out my hairdryer and I will dry that off. So we're coming to our first mountain. So I'm going to use a very watery version of this blue. Think mint tea, think very, see-through. transparent, so you can see the white of the mountain behind. And I might just run a lot of water over this so it's nice and light blue right up against there. And don't worry about going over these lines because we will be painting over those anyway. So we're going to bring a nice light blue to the edge of that first pencil line. The lighter, and the more distant something is, the lighter color it is. This rule is broken if you have, if you'll notice on a sunny day, but you have some clouds, the sun hits a lot of the mountains, but where the cloud is, it gets darker. So there we have some light blue. I don't mind if I bring it, soften it at the end with a little water so that it sort of naturally fades to white. And so I think that's a nice light blue. I see that little pool right there, so I can lift it. I did forget to mention that I have taped the watercolor paper down onto a piece of cardboard. I use a board normally at home. I didn't have my boards here at the library, so I just found a piece of cardboard and I taped it down with painter's tape. And so that's easy enough to do. So now it's time to wait for that to dry, or get out your hair dryer and dry it off. So it looks like our most distant mountains are now dry. So we take this same color, but this time we mix it a little stronger. So it's the same blue, but not so much, not as watery. Think, instead of mint tea, think of, black tea or weak coffee. It's just a stronger color. Doesn't mean we don't have lots of water in it, because we want it to flow also off our brush. A lot of times, you won't see the brush stroke in watercolor because you're really just delivering the color onto the paper. See how that flows together. So I'm doing this foreground mountain. And in order to blend it in, I can add a little water at the bottom edge. And I haven't forgotten about that mountain right there. So just blend it with some water at the foreground, because we are going to do another layer of mountains in here. But that gives you a nice contrast between that distant mountain and this foreground mountain. You could even, as I did in the other painting, because of that red in the sky, I've just added a little bit of red to that section of the mountain, like it's somehow catching some of the red color. Just makes it a little bit darker. Nice thing about having it on the board is I can pick it up and let that water flow. It's part of the charm of watercolor painting. So it blends, you don't have hard edges. You can add a little water down there just to soften it so it's not a hard edge where we don't want a hard edge. Again, let that flow and just add a little water at the end. That blends that kind of nicely. Okay. Okay, I'm happy enough with that. Now we let that dry. I'm still waiting for that mountain to dry, but I'm going to, and it's almost there, but I'm going to just put in this mountain right here. And how I'm going to do that is I'm not going to touch off this edge, otherwise I'm just going to draw that color up into that area. I'll leave a little white in there between the two. So it gives the idea that there is a mountain back there, but it's, and I can even dab the bottom edge of it with a little paper. So to give the idea, maybe there's fog. You know, it is the Smoky Mountains. The idea that there's fog at this bottom, in between this mountain and that mountain. So that gives you that idea. So that just gives it a bit more interest. 3 layers of mountains there. So I think I'm gonna go to the next level of mountains, because even if it's not 100% dry, it's not bone dry, it may give me a nice, we'll see, we're gonna experiment. I'm gonna start taking a little bit of that Prussian blue, mixing it with my ultramarine blue for the little bit of darker color. And this mountain, I'm just gonna put it in here. Does seem like it's a little bit wetter than I would like for this layer, but I'm a little impatient, and that's okay. I'm not going to ruin it. It's just going to be a little, the edge of that top of that mountain is going to be a little softer than the others. But we're beginning now, as the mountains get closer to us, we see more texture on the mountain. You know, we'll see the top edge, we may see the outline of some trees. So that's kind of what we're getting here with this. Bring that forward. Nice and dark at that top edge, just to delineate where the next layer that we're seeing is coming to. So that gives us, so we've now got 1, 2, 3, 4 layers of mountains. Just make sure that it's darker than the one behind. Okay. And I can darken that all the way to the foreground, because it's getting darker as it comes to the closer to us. And I can even give that some texture, because you know we're going to paint some trees in here, and some of the trees will go right up into the sky. So we have trees here in the foreground. And my brush is leaving little dabs in the color, and that gives us the idea of foliage and the base of trees in the foreground. And you'll see how this makes sense when I add the trees that will go up into the sky. There we go, some nice texture. the idea of trees and foliage here in the foreground. So now we'll let that dry a little while. So now that this front level is dry enough to start the next step, I mixed up a lot of that Prussian blue because that is the darkest color we have. And so I'm going to start to put in a couple of trees. Now, this painting is not very different, but different from what the first one we were modeling it on. But each painting is unique, so you make your own judgments as to where you want to put a tree. I like that this is the brightest part. I like that there's fog here. I'm not going to cover that up with a tree. I like to preserve it. So I'm going to put a tree maybe right here. So the base of it will be round about here, and I don't mind if this is somewhat wet. I don't want it to be too definite down here, but it's the base of a tree. Now, when I do a tree, usually I do the center line first, and this is where the point of your brush is going to come into effect. So you only want to use the very point of your brush to put the center line in for the center of your tree. Now, if you observe trees as you go around your neighborhood or whatever, you'll see that the branches, mostly, they'll either curve up or go straight out and up. So we can start from the base or we can start from the top. It doesn't matter, just as long as the branches come out from the center point and point upwards. Trees, much like flowers, like sunflowers, they reach for the sun. So the branches, and you really only see the tips of the branches on the outside. The inside, you've got other branches that are coming towards us, other branches that are going away. We don't really see those. We only see the ones really going to the side, but they're in here kind of making this middle part of it somewhat thick. So as we go up the tree, think triangle, think Christmas tree. These are evergreen fir trees. Not sure what the most common evergreen is here in the Blue Ridge. The top will have a point, and usually 2 stems either side, and then they start to get thicker and wider as you come down. So that's roughly, and we want it to be somewhat uneven. In nature, things are not exactly the same size. As you observe leaves, as they fall, they're all different sizes. Branches will be long and short. So we break it up so they're not all the same shape. That's pretty much the tree as it comes from the foreground up into the sky. So this is the darkest part of our painting back down here in this, at the base. Okay. So I'm going to work over this way a little bit with my darkest color. I want to put a couple of trees over this side. So I'm working that. This is like another ridge we're seeing right here. It's darker than what you see there. And it's okay if that's still a little wet. It's just not going to run because it has dried somewhat. So let's see, where else do I want a tree? I think I'm going to put a tree right here. It's going to come up. Maybe not as high as this one. Maybe I'll have it come to the middle between that line and that line. Using just the tip at the very top, just the tip of my brush. Want it nice and skinny. And we start putting in the branches as we come down, thickening it up. Overall, it's going to be smaller than that tree. And then I'll do another one that's taller, I think. And this is all about feeling the balance. And I could even give the impression of another tree right there. It doesn't have to be defined. Just the idea that this is a ridge of trees that are going off into the distance there. Now we'll keep that nice and dark. Let's keep working this direction. I think I'll put another one next to that that maybe is taller than this one even. So this one might go all the way up into the sky up here. Tip of the brush again to get the very tip top of it. And drawing that center line from which all the branches will come. Little small ones at the top, getting wider as you come down. Some coming straight out, some pointing upwards, you know, somewhat random, not the same size or shape. Nice and dark, it'll stand out from the background. Okay. Down here, it's because it's dark behind it. I'm not worried about the shape. Only the branches that can be seen that stand out. So there's that, and then imagine there's another tree there. So we're only just seeing the tip of it. There's this ridge of trees. Goes off into the distance, maybe one more. And so there you have the base of those trees, creating another ridge line. Comes down to there. And I think I like to leave this so we have a feel of maybe this is a field in front of this tree line. And I think if I look at that, that it's complete. It just needs to dry, and then I can contemplate that a little bit and see if it needs anything else. I'm seeing that maybe this top of this tree needs to be thinner. Very delicate, the top, the very tip of my brush to give that tree a feeling of height and getting thicker as it comes down to the base. So, and again, maybe it's the impression of some more trees here, pointy shapes, but nothing defined. Triangular. I think it's done. Now I just have to wait for that to dry before I take the tape off. So I will do that before I leave you. So here's the finished painting. You can see it is quite different from the example that I followed, as will your painting be different from this one. And that's okay. Each painting is a creation and an individual thing in itself, just like each one of us and how we see, and watercolor has a life of its own. It will do its own thing. So we just work with it, we guide it, and we create. And I would love if you would post pictures of the painting that you create. If you would like to, I would love to see them. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you have lots of fun with watercolors. Bye for now.